Welcome to the Stories of School Leadership podcast, the podcast where we elevate the voices of and create connections between inspirational leaders from the UK and around the world. I'm Emma Lurie, and thank you for joining me as I share these journeys, inspirations, and stories of education, leadership, and life. I'm so privileged in this episode to be joined by Sadia Hussain-Savuk, who shares so openly and honestly her own experiences of education in Scotland and her career pathway. We talk about her own experiences as a Muslim woman of colour. We talk about glass ceilings, about recruitment challenges, and really her lived experience, which is so valuable. And I urge everybody listening to really take some time to think about this episode. I absolutely loved it, and I really hope you do too. So let's get going. Sadia, it's so fantastic to have you with me. Thank you for spending a little bit of time to share your journey. It would be great to know who you are, where you are at the moment, and what your role is.
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm so excited. So my name is Sadia Hussain-Savuk, and I am based in central Scotland. So I sit exactly halfway between Edinburgh and Glasgow. And my background is a biology teacher. So I was a biology teacher for 15 years, but I'm now in recovery. And I'm working as an independent education consultant, specialising in the field of equality, diversity, and inclusion.
Thank you. That's a really interesting phrase, recovery, which I'm sure we'll come back to a little bit later. But Sadia, are you happy to share with us a bit about your own experience of school? I think it's always a really nice place to start with people who end up working in that field. So what was school like for you?
Absolutely. I hated school. It wasn't for me. I didn't feel like I belonged. There wasn't enough. I don't think there was enough role models for me, and there weren't enough people who understood my lived experience and my perspective of the world. And so it wasn't a great experience. I did what I had to do, but I couldn't wait to leave school at the end.
And what you sort of shared with me before we recorded, how you identify, and that might used to be useful to share with listeners, just to think about what that was like, I guess, from your perspective, and why that disparity was there.
So I grew up in Scotland, and I went to school through the 80s and 90s, and it's at the time of the Gulf War, and I was unfortunate enough to have the surname Hussein, so I was walking around the playground with a target on my back. And also, although the term racism was known, I think people didn't really understand the long-term implications of racist behaviour towards an individual. And so when racist incidents did occur in my school and I reported it, I never got the support that I wanted or needed. I never felt that the teachers or the staff that I reported to understood just how damaging it was for me. And I didn't feel that there was anyone in my school that I could trust. I didn't have a group of friends who I felt really understood who I was as a person. And interestingly, it comes down to identity. I felt like I was carrying two identities. So being the child of immigrant parents, my home life culture and identity was completely different to the one that I had at school. And they never crossed over because my parents didn't understand the school culture, and the school didn't understand how different Pakistani culture was. And it was so consuming, and it requires so much energy to be invested to just maintain those two different personas. And if they ever came together, so if I ever bumped into a group of friends when I was with my mum, I didn't know how to bring the two worlds together, so I worked really hard to try and keep them separate because I wasn't sure how to navigate the path in the middle.
Wow. Thank you for sharing so honestly, because we don't always hear to that depth how that feels. And I guess I'm assuming that at the time you maybe weren't able to eloquently describe that feeling, because when we're children we don't know that what we're feeling then, I guess, is different, or different to our peers, or different to how things could be if were in a different grew up in a different place or a different country, or had a different school, different adults who could treat you in a way that would have been much more supportive. So yeah, thank you for sharing so honestly. Did that experience then have an impact on your decision to go into education as a career?
Absolutely. I think people were very surprised when I decided that I wanted to go back and be a teacher. So I didn't do it to be representation. I didn't do it because I wanted to diversify the teaching profession. I did it because I believe that if I hate something so much, I need to try and do something to fix it. And so when I went back into education, because um, I wanted to be the teacher that reacted when a child came and told me that, discrimination had been targeted at them. I wanted to be the teacher that reassured students that their lived experience was valid. And I wanted to have conversations. So I wanted to talk about things like, the Gulf War, for example, and the impact that that has on the lives of Muslims or Pakistani people living in the UK. So I went back to try and fix a system that I felt didn't work for me. I really lacked the sense of belonging when I was at school. So I spent 14 years of my life in the Scottish education system. And when I left school, I wanted to run as fast as I could. I didn't have those fond memories where I wanted to keep in touch with my teachers or I wanted to go back and visit and do a talk. I didn't have that. But I feel like 14 years of your life is such a significant period of time. And I wanted the children that came through my classroom, if nothing else, I wanted to be the teacher that they would keep in touch with, or the teacher that they would email to let me know of their successes, because I think that that's really important for them to know that they've had that, it's not really a reassurance, but just had the support that they needed at particular milestones within their life. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go back and be the teacher that I never had.
So powerful. And I think what you're talking about there, isn't it, is being seen, ensuring that children could be seen and heard. And did it feel like that's what you did at the start of your teaching career? How was that first little step into,
It was
early
amazing.
career?
No, I loved it. I went into teaching, and having worked in other kind of part-time jobs, I came into teaching. This is it. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So education is where I am. It's my vocation. It's where my passion lies. And yes, it did in many ways. I gathered a little following of students who would talk to me. So we would talk about anything and everything. So although I was a biology teacher, I would talk to my pupils as they were coming into the classroom about things that were important. We'd have conversations about things that were not related to the lesson, but I felt were really important for just kind of citizenship training and kind of, trying to enthuse them with the concept of social justice. And, when I started wearing my hijab, I started wearing it as an adult. So I was well into my 30s before I started to wear it. And I was really nervous about going back to school after the holidays and wondering how the kids would react. And actually, some of the most open-minded conversations were from the children, just very openly asking me why I decided to wear the hijab. During Ramadan, they would ask me what Ramadan was and why I did it. And, they really wanted to interrogate me in a way that I think adults are scared to do. So I think sometimes adults are really scared to ask direct questions. And they think it's because I will be offended, but it's almost more offensive when they make assumptions and they don't just ask me. So it was really refreshing to have those conversations with children. And I hope that when I have those conversations with children, if a child has never met a Muslim, or never encountered an educated woman of color, that they could go back and have that dinner table conversation with their family and say, "Do you know, mum, I met a Muslim, and actually Muslims are really nice people." Or, I've got a teacher and she's Pakistani and her parents were immigrants, but she's teaching biology, and we talk about all this amazing stuff. So the interaction with the children was amazing. It was the best part of the job for me.
It always is. Like, kids are great, aren't they? And they open your eyes to, like you said, the conversations that can be had, because they don't have that fear. They don't yet have, and I guess the younger they are, usually the less influenced they are by some of the things around them, to be open and ask questions. But I think that's a couple of really important points. Well, one is about, you're right, I think adults are scared to ask directly, to be interested and curious when we come to talking about race, because it comes with it this big elephant in the room about being concerned about offending somebody, I guess, in the same way sometimes about disability, but not to the extent. And I think that's a really important point that we need to be thinking about. I guess how you were having those conversations with your students, I would imagine that at the same time peers and your colleagues around you saw and heard the influence of that, and that was really beneficial, but you needed to be there in that job to make that happen. And well, I guess we'll come on to later the fact that we need to do, we need to do more. We need to make sure that children have representation from a range of different adults who are working with them for all different ideas, because at the moment education is still very, especially here in the UK, it's very much white British, and we need to do more. And white British able-bodied, so that was something really interesting. And then the other element that I thought was really fascinating was you talking a bit more about this idea of how children, I guess, go home and have that conversation at home. So your wider circle of influence there is so important. Like, yes, you've got those children in your classroom, and that's amazing, but then you're spreading that change. Like, being a change agent is you teaching in the classroom, but like that snowball effect of those conversations that happen at home. So a really powerful bit of your career, I guess. And so what happened next for kind of your teaching and career progression?
So I think when I went back into education as a teacher, I didn't appreciate that I was going to be a colleague. And so the focus, although my focus was very much directed on the educational experience of the students in my class, I hadn't appreciated that there was going to be workplace politics, and there was going to be relationships and identities that had to be addressed through kind of those colleague relationships. And initially, when I started teaching, I very quickly realized that I had to put rose-tinted glasses on. So there was low-level racism, unconscious bias, kind of stereotyping comments that were being made by other staff members through ignorance, I think, more than malice. So just to make that clear. And I laughed along with the jokes that were made. I, just kind of tried to change myself to fit into the situation, so that I could be an equal, so that I was in line for promotional opportunities, that people would take me seriously. That didn't happen. So no matter how much I changed myself to try and fit into the profession, which is predominantly white, and so in some places, some departments predominantly male, and it didn't work, because when I went for promotional opportunities, I just felt like there was huge glass ceiling above me, and it didn't matter how much I trained, how much I worked, how many hours additionally I worked. I was working till late in school because I wanted management to see that I am working. I'm not going home. I had to do it to be recognized to be doing it. And it didn't help. My passion was to move into pastoral care, and I was really, really set on becoming a head of year. But I realized after 7 years of attempting to get into the pastoral system that no, the school was just, the school was just not going to make me a head of year. And so a couple of things happened, not in school, but happened when out with school. So first of all, my daughter, when she was in primary 3, was a victim of a low-level racist incident in the school, and the school dealt with it. It was fine. But it was just that realization that why 20 years later are my children still having to deal with the same language that I dealt with when I was their age. And then the second incident was when I was on maternity leave with my youngest, who's now almost 5. I was sitting having lunch in a coffee shop with my mum, just minding my own business. And this elderly man walked past me and made a racist comment at me, just publicly, as if he had every right to say what he was saying. And it really took me back. And then I started to reflect on all the things that had been said to me. And I realized that I hadn't been reacting to it. I'd just been accepting it. But I think that was, when they talk about a cup and that you're putting drops in it, I think that was the drop that caused the overspill. And then when I went back to school after maternity leave, I couldn't see things in the same way. It was like the rose-tinted glasses had come off, and I was seeing the injustice. I was seeing the way that women were being spoken to. I saw the way that people of color were being talked about. And again, not out of malice, but it's just part of this kind of structural racism, structural discrimination that exists because the society that we live in allows it to happen. And so I decided at that point that I needed to make change, but the change had to be bigger. It wasn't enough just to be in school. So I started to get myself involved in lots of projects. So I did a little bit of work with the Scottish Government. I'm still on one of their curriculum reforms committees. I wanted to get more involved with the unions and kind of equality training. I started to kind of look into things like teacher training opportunities. So, would it be possible for me to offer inset training to teachers from a lived experience kind of perspective. And it didn't work out in the school that I was in, because I think when you raise these conversations with people, it presents a challenge. People are being challenged on something that makes them really uncomfortable. So I talk about race and people assume that I'm calling them racist because it might be a behavior that they have demonstrated in the past. And it comes back to, it's not malice, it's ignorance in some cases. But I think for them it's quite condemning to be called a racist, or they feel that that's what they were being called. And so sorry, I've just gone on a bit, but the next stage
Great.
was I decided then to leave that school. I thought maybe I needed to go where people didn't know the old me, because
Mm.
what had happened was I'd come back from maternity leave and I was behaving in a different way now, and that made people quite uncomfortable because I was questioning things I didn't question before.
Mm.
And so I went to a different school, and it was a completely different environment. It was in the middle. It was in the middle of Edinburgh City, and it was an international school, so a lot more kind of diverse perspectives. I realized quickly, so I started the job in September, and by February I had decided that I just didn't want to be confined to a classroom. So I went to my head teacher and I said, I'm going to email you to hand in my notice. I don't have a job to go to, but I know that I just don't want to be in the classroom anymore. I need to make change, and I can't do that from behind my desk. Um, and she was super supportive. So I've kind of gone off. I'm still involved in education, but not being in the classroom has given me the freedom and the agency to be able to get involved in lots of different projects. And in the kind of 6 months that I've been doing this, it's grown arms and legs. So I'm still on the kind of government curriculum reforms committee. I have opportunity to do things like this, to get my voice out there and just to be able to speak to other school leaders who are listening. I went back to university and decided I wanted to do my master's. So I'm doing a master's in inclusive education because I have the lived experience, but what I don't have perhaps is the ability to write policy and to enforce practice. And so enforce is the wrong word, but to try and encourage practice. And so that, I guess, I know I can do it without the degree, but I feel like having the degree will make people believe in me, and maybe that's just a self-esteem thing on my part, but the course is massively interesting. So when people ask me what I do, I don't really know what I do anymore, but the two kind of main areas that I'm working in is I still work with schools. I do a lot of kind of anti-discrimination work with them. I do anti-racism workshops with them. I've kind of had my own consultancy set up now. I do kind of teacher advisory. So sometimes teachers get in touch with me when they need support or they don't know how to deal with the situation. Sometimes teachers get in touch with me because they don't feel that management have dealt with something in a non-discriminatory manner. So I'm a third person to kind of seek reassurance and seek advice from. So I do that kind of stuff. But I've got this new project that's taking off and it's super exciting. So we use a recruitment platform in the independent sector called it's called Teacheroo, which has kind of loads of job adverts on it. And it's kind of powered by this system called School Talent. And I just randomly out of the blue emailed the CEO of these organizations and said, diverse recruitment's not working. Am I just not, using the system properly, or is it broken? And he got back in touch with me. His name's Ewan and he's absolutely fantastic. He got back in touch with me and he said, let's do something about this, because I think that you and I together, we could really make change happen. So we're in the kind of early stages of setting up a kind of recruitment system where we are trying to ensure that schools who advertise on the platform are they are exercising kind of diverse recruitment policies, so giving opportunities to people who perhaps wouldn't otherwise have opportunities to move into particular roles. But in addition to that, what we want to do is to make sure that schools are set up so that when these individuals move into those schools are They understand the perspectives that their employee will bring, and they're set up to be inclusive. So their employee has a better chance of getting good experience, getting put onto kind of paths to professional progression, and being taken seriously, and not having to jump through more loops or be faced with glass ceilings kind of thing. So so I've got like a two-pronged approach. I'm attacking schools and trying to change education, but I'm also trying to create a diverse workforce. And I think the two things have to work simultaneously if we are going to create positive change in the education system.
Yes. You so eloquently describe how important this is to talk about. And I think what really struck me was your, in the same way that you talked about your own school experience and being in that, you know, that first role as a teacher, how I just don't know if we talk enough about those experiences and say, this is what happened. I know you used the phrase, like, I was never going to be given that opportunity. And I think some people would question that and say, well, no, keep going, you know, try different angles. It is there, you can do it. And actually, I think that's naive, because what we need to front up to is, no, these opportunities are not available for some people for a range of different reasons. And what you are doing, whether you have a small catchphrase for your current job, is disrupting that and making change. Because, like you said, there is only so much you can do from one perspective behind the desk, as you use that phrase, but actually coming out and using that lived experience to share with people, A, how it can be different, and B, why it's really important. It's exciting. I just love to, you know, hearing about it, because we need it. We need to hear your perspective and to be doing something about it and taking action. And the other bit, I guess, in that bravery about talking about it, and the fact that we need to do that, put ourselves out there and say, this has happened to me, and this is really hard. That really struck me was this idea you talked about, that kind of wearing different hats. You know, you'd had those different roles when you're at school. You'd had to be like two different people, and then you're going into the classroom teaching and you're having to be two different people. Then you become a mum, so the whole maternity and returning to work thing for women is so challenging, but you're already adding that on top of the other hats that you're wearing. So it's so complex, isn't it? It would I'd love to hear a bit more about, kind of, before we finish, like, recommendations for kind of heads and other leaders about recruitment, because I think that's really interesting. But I'd love to hear a bit about, I guess, people who've influenced you. You talked about, you know, the head that you're with who was really supportive. So I guess people or others, like books or research or ideas that have helped you and that maybe could help other people.
Absolutely. So one of my biggest inspirations is a wonderful lady called Dr. Khadija Mohammed. And she works at the University of West of Scotland, but I kind of met her in a personal capacity initially. I was in a kind of a professional CPD event, which I wasn't really invited to. It was more kind of targeted at universities and colleges, but the tickets were free, so I thought I would just hop online anyway.
Just go.
Yeah, I wanted to see what was happening, and I do that a lot. That's my top tip when there's opportunities to get involved or to listen into seminars, even if you think that it's not your field of interest. It's amazing who you will meet, and it's amazing what you will learn. So, you know, taking your kind of spot in education and seeing what comes before it and what comes after, and everything that comes out the sides of it as well. So, I met this really lovely woman called Yasmin Hussain, and she stuck about at the end of the Zoom call just to kind of interrogate some of the stuff that I'd said. And then she said, "Oh, I'd love to meet you for a coffee. And I've got this friend who I think that you would really like to meet." So I went along to meet them in Glasgow for a coffee, and I met Khadija. And this, I don't know how many years ago this was, but must have been about 4 years ago now. And we're still in touch, so in a personal and a professional capacity. So Khadija's disrupted the system. She's not shy about walking away from something that she thinks is unjust. So she's often asked to sit on committees and groups. And if she feels that she's there as a tick box, she'll just walk away. And I just think that takes so much professional integrity, because we worry as professionals about our reputation. But I think it's more important to worry about where we stand on the issue. And I know you know, when we have jobs and we have professional positions and stuff, we have to consider it all. But she does that, and I think that really stood out to me. The second person was Rowena Arshad, and she works for Edinburgh University. And I wish she had been there when I had done my PGDE course, because the course that she runs now just sounds absolutely amazing. She produces a lot of papers and blogs, and I read a lot of what she produces. She's very influential in education. And then the last one is a lesser known name, but you know, she is just as inspiring as the other two. It's a lady called Nuzhat Udmani, and I met her through an organization called SAMI, who Khadija kind of co-chairs. And it's an organization targeting Scottish, Asian and ethnic minority educators, and it's filling a gap in that kind of professional learning area. So they take Scottish ethnic minority educators under their wing, and they give them coaching and leadership training. And what they gave to me was a lot of confidence, and just understanding who I am and what I stand for. So I met Nuzhat through that channel, and she was a primary teacher. She now teaches primary education at Stirling University, and she just has so much to offer in the area as well. So these three women I've picked because they are women who come from marginalized communities, who have faced their own struggles, and they've fought through that. So I guess looking at these three women, I hope that, you know, in the future, I'll be up there with them on that pedestal.
Absolutely. I'm putting you up there right now.
Thank you.
And what about, I know you mentioned kind of doing the masters, which is always eye-opening in terms of like research and complex stuff, but has there been some reading maybe through that, or just wider reading, that you found really interesting?
The whole course has been really interesting. So I'm doing it part-time and it's over 3 years. So I'm in my first year with a view, I think, to do my PhD at the end of it, but we'll see, we'll see. But the first course that I did was all about inclusive education and the policy behind it. So looking at things like UNESCO and the influences of global policies. Um, but within that, within the courses, I'm given freedom to explore an element that's important to me. And I feel for this course, it really lets me bring my lived experience in. And when I'm writing and researching, it helps me to make sense of the experiences that I had. It almost validates the experiences that I had through the reading of other academic papers. So the first essay I wrote was on belonging, and I talked about how the Scottish education system puts so much value on attainment as grades and kind of the certificates that they get at the end of their exam period, but nobody measures belonging. So has a school really been successful? Has the education system been successful if a child leaves the education system after 14 years and has no emotional attachment to the school or to the people that have been with them through that journey? And so I really questioned whether we were measuring the right thing, and why we don't just ask children how they feel in the system. Why, you know, education is a product. We're the only product that doesn't ask the consumer for a review on the product. And I think that that's something that we really need to do more of. And then the kind of the thing that I'm working on at the moment is this concept of colonial curriculums. And so I don't really know what direction it's going in at the moment, but the concept of kind of Britain being a colonizer and a lot of the values that we hold in society that therefore influence the education that we have today come from those colonial views. So we are teaching from one perspective because the education system has been carried down, you know, the knowledge has been carried down. But is it time that we look around the room? Because in terms of Scotland, the demographic is changing vastly. We've gone from 10 years ago, you know, having a 7% ethnic minority student population to now having 14%, you know, and it could rise another 10% in another 10 years. But curriculums are never future proof. So we're still teaching a curriculum that came in 10 years ago, and it just doesn't work for the demographic that we have now. And so that's what I'm trying to tackle. But I'm also spinning it back to Scotland and saying, you know, Scotland is a colonised nation. We've lost the Scots language. Gaelic is in danger of dying out. So it's not just about looking at the countries in the global south and looking at how they've been influenced, but it's also about looking inwards and saying, you know, we've adapted certain behaviours in Scotland that have come from that kind of post-colonial mindset. And I'm trying to kind of unpick that. It's in the very early stages, a lot of red pen all over it. And I think the next area that I want to tackle is the cultural experiences of children who have EAL, so English as an additional language, and the assumption that they carry particular cultural identities. So the concept of kind of linking a child having an English as an additional language and making them wear particular kind of hats of culture, hats of heritage, and how that influences their experience of education as well.
Wow. I think I could just talk to you all day.
Thank
It
you.
sounds so fascinating. Genuinely, I'm so hooked. I need to read when I've got a bit more headspace, read read some of these things. Thank you so much. We've dug into lots already. I'd love, I guess, to hear a little bit more before we finish about this idea of recruitment and just, I think you used the phrase, what I would say to school leaders, and I'd like to know a bit more. Like, what else would you say to school leaders about what we can be doing to better support our students from your lived experience, but what we can be doing for staff and that staff we've got, but that recruitment,
Yeah.
shifting that because we need to move that forward.
So if we look at students first, we ask students and we have student bodies, but how much of what they say do we actually value? So sometimes I feel like, you have little working groups for various things, but actually what's taken away is definitely influenced by the staff that facilitate these conversations, or in a lot of schools it goes up into senior management, and some of the ideas are kind of vetoed further up. And so we're having the kids around the table and we're listening to the words that are coming out of their mouth, but we're not actually listening to them. We're not acknowledging their experiences. And I think it comes back to this concept of belonging. So you can't measure belonging, but you know whether you belong in a space or not. You know whether you're welcome or not. And I think we need to put a little bit more emphasis on that in the school system. Because I think what some people don't understand, if they don't have the lived experience and they haven't had adverse experiences, they don't understand that your school experiences actually stay with you for the rest of your life. So as an adult, as an adult, there are members of staff who taught me at school, and I would not speak to them. There are kids who I went to school with, and if they sent me a Facebook friend request, I would knock it back. I mean, they may not be the same person 20 years on, 20, 30 years on, but in my head, they're still that person. They're still that person who treated me like that, when I was younger. And I think we need to appreciate that what happens to a child might seem quite trivial to an adult who doesn't appreciate it. But if you put it into the bigger context of what their lived experience is and what their life feels like to them, if I give you an example, if someone makes a low-level discriminatory comment, um, it might seem really trivial in the moment, but actually, have they heard that is that the 10th time that day they've heard that? Is that on the back of a lot of other discrimination that they get? Is that on the back of, somebody hiding their school bag from them because they are of a different color or race or religion? And so I think we kind of have to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And it's easy for me to do that because I'm not in the classroom anymore.
Mm.
And when you're a teacher, life is busy. You've got things that you have to do, your reports, parents' evenings, you've got exams to mark, you've got kids to teach, you've got lessons to plan. But even as a biology teacher, I was always a firm believer that biology was simply it was still simply the vehicle of education, but I was a teacher of children. I wanted to be involved in more than just the qualification they get in biology. I wanted to some way influence their way of thinking. And I don't know how we do that. I think it all comes to how education systems are made up, and it comes down to how policies are written. So when educational reforms are being carried out, this needs to be considered, and we need to have committees and groups made up of people who have had adverse experiences of school, to be able to sit in these organizations and say, yes, that's a great idea, but actually in reality, that's not how it's going to play out.
No,
And we're kind of in this unfortunate situation where I think a lot of policies are signed off by people who've never been in classrooms. And I think that really needs to change.
I agree. Preaching to the converted. Yeah, I think what you've touched upon there is that what we're talking about is that teachers and adults working in schools should be afforded the time and the privilege of supporting those children, young people in a broader way about race equality, as much as absolutely about personal development and, emotional intelligence. It's not that we need to add all that stuff into the curriculum. The curriculum is so crammed. Teachers don't have time, don't feel they have time, or aren't prioritized. Schools aren't, not all schools are prioritizing that enough to actually give teachers that space and that time to have that as such a big part of their role. Because you're right, okay, you've got the knowledge and the skills that it's our job as educators to give to our children. But yeah, where's all that other bit that is way more important for them to learn? Like, yeah, you touched upon it. When we live, curriculums just haven't moved on to match what we need to be educating our children for. So that's a massive issue. And then you touched upon this idea, which I'm an early years educator, that's my passion. So for me, this is a biggie. Us as adults, and I talk about this from being a parent as well, valuing and recognizing children knowing themselves and knowing what they need. Like, okay, yes, they don't have all the knowledge to pass the test or the pub quiz. Neither do I. I'm rubbish at pub quiz. But they know what they need. They know what they want. And I think you are so right. We do not give children that. We don't grace them with that enough. We don't say, actually, we value that you know what you need. So what do you need? Like, let's work on that, whether that is from a knowledge perspective or an emotional belonging perspective, or from a how this space is set up. Like, there's so much that we just, and it reminds me of that Matilda, like, I'm big, you're small, I'm right, you're wrong perspective, that I think if we really boiled it down to, that's where we go to as adults. Like, I'm the teacher now, I'm the head teacher, I know what's right, no one else does. And that's not the same for all schools, of course it's not, but I think there's a lot of that out there. And I see that, like, as a parent, I'm constantly trying to figure out, like, when is it okay for me to be right and say, this is definitely what we're doing, I have to make a decision, and when do I need to give the power to these little people who need to know that their voice is valid. And that's also interlinked, isn't it, with our experiences about whether we're going to have the bravery, like you are, to go out into the world and say, do you know what, this isn't right, we need to make a change, and actually I'm going to stand up and be someone who's doing that, which is incredibly brave.
Thank you.
Incredibly brave. Just before we go, to touch upon a little bit about recruitment, because I think, yeah, that's so valid for the children, but what about a head teacher, who's sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, Sadia's right, I need to think more about this for my team, or I really want to be far more proactive in making sure that I am recruiting more diverse staff members for my team. What can they do?
So when you're looking at, so if we look at recruitment and we look at career progression, and we do a kind of male-female comparison, there's this idea that women have to work harder. You have to be seen to be doing the things, whereas a man can be taken on the face value that he's capable of doing it. So he doesn't necessarily have had to demonstrate it. He just demonstrates that he will be able to do it. And there is a book on that somewhere. I can't remember what it is, but I did read it. I didn't make it up. And I think the same is true for people of color as well. If we're, I think that, so I always talk about, as a woman, I have to jump through a hoop, but as a woman of color, I have to jump through a hoop that's on fire. So there's this assumption that you have to be seen. And that was always my knockback. So my knockback was always, well, you say that you can do it, but can you show me where you've done it? No, I can't, because you didn't give me the opportunity. I haven't had the opportunity to be able to do that. You've allowed somebody to step up and be a stand-in head of department, or you've allowed somebody to kind of do an acting head of year role or whatever, but you've never gave me that opportunity. You've never let me go against, up against this person and actually have the chance to do those things. So I guess it's a form of affirmative action. It's it's the right thing to do, to give somebody the opportunity. We always get knockbacks. It's, people say, get more training, do more coursework, get more training. You think, how much more can I do? I've done everything. And why do I have to get more training when, someone's sitting in the job and they haven't done that training course. They haven't done that reading. They haven't had to do that qualification. And so what you have to do is look inwards. These are the words of Penny Raybiger, who works at Leeds Beckett Uni, and she is fab as well. But she challenges people to look inwards and say, why am I making this decision? So if you've got candidates, look and say, why is this person getting the job? And then look at, well, what is the importance of that thing that's allowed you to differentiate between the two? Is it valid? Or is it just because as humans, we tend towards identities that we identify with? And then it's causing that disruption and that challenge to yourself, to that way of thinking. I think for you to do that as a leader, you have to read, and you have to read stuff that makes you uncomfortable. So reading books like I'm not going to talk to white people about race, I think it's called. But read it as a white person, listen to the lived experiences of a person of color. I'm reading a book at the moment called The Darker Side of Western Modernity by Walter Mignolo, and he talks about colonialism, but from a Latin American point of view, which is something I'd never really considered. I'd never really thought of Latin America as being part of the global South, but it makes me think in a different way. And I think, when you're a teacher and you're busy and you're marking, it's really hard to find time to read. But pick up a paper that's like 3 sides long and read it. Have a look at blogs, interrogate, go on Google and type in words that are going to throw up stuff to you that you're uncomfortable with, and read it. And then if you're in recruitment and you're not sure if you're getting it right, get training. There are so many external organizations that can come in and they can do training with you. They will challenge you. They will make you feel really uncomfortable, and they'll make you think about behaviors that you demonstrate that without even realizing that you demonstrate them. But it's only in doing that that you can change that. So, if you think about children, if a child writes an essay and the grammar is wrong, you will fix the grammar or tell them how to fix it, and they will see their mistakes. But as adults, we don't really think about that. We get really offended when people point out our mistakes to us. I think we just have to take them as an education. We're learning too. So if you are a school leader and you're keen to diversify your school workplace, read, challenge yourself, and look for external support. Now, I do have a consultancy, so you can look me up on LinkedIn, and you can find me on Twitter. And if I can't do it, I have connections with people who can help you to do it. So ask for help. You'll make your school better for it.
Yeah. It really reminded me of that quote. What is it? Something like beauty is in the butterfly, but growth happens in the cocoon. Like as leaders, like we're talking about leaders here now, like it is so important. And I, found it really hard to make the time to read and to research and do those sorts of things. But if we don't do that, we're not going to make change. And we all know we need change, like hugely in education for so many different things. And I think you're so right about reaching out for help. We don't do that very often. We don't say, for whatever reason, actually, this isn't my area of expertise. I don't have that lived experience. I'm going to go out and find someone who can come in and make sure we're doing this properly.
Yeah.
Because if we were talking about implementing a new reading program, we would go and find an expert to help us with that. But I don't think we probably do it enough when we're talking about, diversifying the curriculum more so now, I guess, but certainly probably not in recruitment. And I guess it is happening, and there's wonderful people like yourself just doing some of this work, but we need to do more. Sadia, thank you so much for your time. Genuinely, I think I could just keep recording for like another 3 hours.
Thank
I will
you.
stop and say thank you, and then maybe we can just keep going the conversation, or maybe we'll get you back on, because I feel like you have so much to say and it's so valid. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Stories of School Leadership podcast. We'd love to know what inspired you in this episode, so do get in touch and tell us your thoughts. And please share this with friends and colleagues. If you have time, a review would mean so much. It really helps us to reach more people. If you'd like to connect with me to follow my journey or access some support, maybe supervision, coaching, or early years consultancy, you can find me at Stories of School Leadership on Instagram. I'm Emma Lurie on LinkedIn, or my website is emmalurie.co.uk. I hope you have a great day, whatever you're getting up to next, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.